The autumn wind cut through the gaps in the barn siding like 1,000 tiny knives. Alara Quinn pressed her back against the rough wood, one arm wrapped around her eldest daughter, the other holding her two younger children close. The smell of horse manure and old hay filled her nose, but she'd stopped noticing things like that weeks ago. When you're hungry enough, when your children cry themselves to sleep every night asking for food you don't have, small discomforts fade into nothing. "Mama, I'm cold," 6-year-old Thomas whispered against her shoulder, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I know, baby, I know." Alora pulled him tighter, feeling his ribs through the thin fabric of his shirt. When was the last time any of them had eaten a real meal? 3 days? 4? Time blurred when survival became the only thing that mattered. Her eldest, Hannah, sat rigid beside her. At 12, the girl had grown old fast. Too fast. There was something in her eyes that didn't belong there, a hardness that came from watching your father die in a mining accident, and then watching your mother fail to keep the promises she'd made at his grave. "Someone's coming," Hannah whispered, her body tensing. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs. She listened, holding her breath. Footsteps. Heavy. Deliberate. A man's boots crunching through the scattered straw on the other side of the barn. "Please keep walking. Please don't look back here." But the footsteps stopped, then changed direction. Alara's hand instinctively moved to the small knife tucked in her boot. Not much of a weapon, but it was all she had. 8 months of running, hiding, begging for work that never came, and it had come to this: hiding behind a blacksmith's barn with 3 children, waiting for whatever came next. The footsteps grew closer. Alara could see his shadow now, long and dark across the barn floor. The man was tall, broad-shouldered. Through a crack in the wood, she caught a glimpse of expensive boots, the kind that cost more than she'd earned in the last year. "I know you're back there." The voice was low, rough around the edges, but surprisingly calm. "Been watching you for the last 10 minutes. Alara's throat closed up. She pulled the children closer, her mind racing through options she didn't have. Run? Where? Fight? With what? "I'm not here to hurt you." The man moved into view, and Alara's stomach dropped. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in Red Creek knew Rhett Calder. He owned half the county, employed a quarter of the town, and had a reputation that preceded him like a storm cloud. Some said he was fair. Others said he was ruthless. All agreed he was not a man to cross. He stood there in the fading light, his face half in shadow. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he squinted into the sun a lot, or didn't sleep much. His jaw was set hard, but his eyes, there was something in them that wasn't quite what she'd expected from a man of his reputation. "You've been in town 3 days, he said, not moving any closer. "Sleeping rough. The kids haven't eaten. You tried to get work at the mill, the hotel, and the general store. All turned you away." The accuracy of his knowledge made her skin crawl. "You've been following us?" "I own the mill. I have business at the hotel, and Bill Patterson at the general store is my cousin." He shifted his weight, and she noticed he kept his hands visible, away from his sides. "In a town this size, news travels. What do you want?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Same thing I've been wanting since I watched you get turned away from the mill." He paused. "To offer you work." The words hung in the cold air between them. Alara's mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. She'd heard stories about men who offered work to desperate women. Her hand tightened on the knife. Rhett must have seen something in her face because his expression hardened. "I'm talking about honest work. Cooking, cleaning, managing a household. I've got a ranch house with 6 bedrooms and nobody to run it but me and 2 ranch hands who can barely boil water. The place is falling apart. And what would you want in return?" She hated how her voice shook on that last word. For a moment, something that might have been pain flashed across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by that same hard calm. "Food and shelter for you and your kids, a salary of $30 a month, separate quarters in the East Wing, a lock on your door that only you have the key to." He took a breath. "And absolutely nothing else. I'm not that kind of man, Mrs. Quinn." The use of her name startled her. Of course he knew her name. He probably knew everything about her, that she was a widow, that her husband had died in one of the mines Calder didn't own, that she'd been struggling ever since. How do I know I can trust you? Even as she asked it, she knew how absurd the question was. She was hiding behind a barn with 3 starving children. She didn't have the luxury of trust. You don't. He said it flatly, without apology. But you don't have a lot of other options either, and we both know it. Winter's coming. You've got maybe 2 weeks before the first real snow. You planning to sleep in this barn when it's 20 below? Thomas whimpered against her side. The sound cut through her like glass. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why would you do this? You don't know us. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Not softening exactly, but something close to it. Let's just say I know what it's like when the whole damn town turns its back on you. And I know what it's like to have too many empty rooms in a house that used to be full. The weight of those words settled between them, heavy with meanings Alara didn't fully understand. But she heard the truth in them. Whatever his reasons, they were real. Get in the wagon, now. The command cut through her paralysis. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really an offer anymore. It was an order, delivered in the tone of a man who expected to be obeyed. And God help her, she was so tired of fighting. Hannah! She looked at her daughter. Get your brother and sister. The wagon ride to the Calder ranch took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Alara sat in the back with the children, watching the town fade behind them as they climbed into the hills. Rhett drove in silence, his back straight, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The ranch house appeared as they crested a rise, and despite everything, Alara felt her breath catch. It was massive, 2 stories of solid timber and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys. Lights glowed in several windows, warm and inviting against the gathering dark. It looked like the kind of place that shouldn't have any problems. The kind of place where people didn't worry about where their next meal came from or whether they'd freeze to death before spring. But Alara had learned long ago that houses could lie. Rhett pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the porch and climbed down. He moved around to the back, lowering the gate. Come on, I'll show you around. The children climbed down first, their eyes wide as they took in the house. Even Hannah looked impressed, though she tried to hide it. Alara followed, her legs shaky after sitting still for so long. Inside, the house was even more impressive, and more obviously neglected. The main room had a massive stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and rugs that had probably cost a fortune. But dust covered every surface. Dirty dishes were stacked on a side table. The windows hadn't been washed in months, maybe longer. Like I said, Rhett's voice was flat, almost embarrassed. It needs work. It needs a woman's touch, Alara said before she could stop herself. Then immediately regretted it. That phrase, a woman's touch, carried so much weight, so many implications. But Rhett just nodded. My wife would have agreed with you. She always said I could build anything, but I couldn't keep anything nice. The use of past tense answered a question Alara hadn't asked. His wife was dead. That explained the empty rooms, the neglect, the loneliness she'd heard in his voice back at the barn. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be. It was 3 years ago. He said it like that should make it hurt less. Like time was supposed to heal things, it clearly hadn't. Come on, I'll show you the East Wing. The East Wing turned out to be a suite of rooms that had probably been intended for guests. A bedroom, a smaller adjoining room that could serve as a children's room, and a private bathroom with actual running water. Alara stared at the bathtub like it was made of gold. You can get settled tonight, Rhett said from the doorway. Tomorrow we'll talk about duties and schedule. For now, just rest. He paused, then added, The kitchen is stocked. Help yourself to whatever you need. After he left, Alara stood in the middle of the bedroom, listening to the silence. It was too good to be true. It had to be. Men like Rhett Calder didn't just rescue desperate women out of kindness. There had to be a catch, a price she'd have to pay eventually. Mama? Hannah appeared in the doorway, her expression wary. Is this real? I don't know, baby. Alara reached out and pulled her daughter close. But for tonight, let's pretend it is. The kitchen was enormous and better stocked than Alara had dared
This story
hope.
was posted
She
on the
found
channel
bread,
The Rusty
cheese,
Saddle.
cold meat,
Please do
apples,
not
and milk,
repost it in any
actual
form.
fresh milk. Her hands shook as she assembled plates for the children, fighting back tears she couldn't afford to shed. They ate in silence, too hungry for conversation. Even Hannah, who'd been holding herself so rigid all day, seemed to relax slightly as she ate. Thomas and 5-year-old Lily barely came up for air. "Slow down," Alara warned gently. "You'll make yourselves sick." But she understood the desperation. She felt it too, even as she forced herself to eat slowly, to savor each bite, to not think about how long it had been since she'd tasted food this good. After the children were asleep, truly asleep, not that restless, half-conscious state they'd been living in, Ilara stood at the bedroom window, looking out over the dark landscape. The moon was rising, casting silver light across what looked like endless acres of land, corrals, barns, outbuildings. This wasn't just a ranch, it was an empire, and she'd just been invited into it by a man she didn't know for reasons she didn't understand. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Rhett standing there with an armload of blankets and a small wooden box. "Almost forgot," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Extra blankets. It gets cold up here at night." He set them down, then held out the box. "And this, my wife's. She'd want someone to use it." Alara opened the box carefully. Inside was a simple but sturdy sewing kit, along with several spools of thread, needles, and patches of fabric. "The kids' clothes," Rhett said quietly. "They're pretty worn. Thought you might be able to do something with these." The kindness of it hit her like a physical blow. She looked up at him, this man who'd found them behind a barn and brought them into his home, and tried to find words that didn't sound hollow. "Thank you," was all she could manage. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But he paused at the door, his back still to her. "Just so we're clear, you're not charity. This is a job. You work, you earn your keep. I expect this house to be clean, meals on time, and things run properly. That's the deal." "Understood." "Good." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Alara closed the door and leaned against it, the sewing kit still in her hands. The message was clear. She wasn't a guest. She was an employee. This was business, not mercy. But as she looked at the sleeping faces of her children, warm and fed for the first time in weeks, she couldn't bring herself to care what they called it. The first week was harder than Alara expected. Not the work itself. She'd been poor all her life, knew how to clean and cook and make do with less. But the scale of it was overwhelming. The house had 14 rooms, not counting the bathrooms and utility spaces. Every surface was coated in dust and neglect. The kitchen hadn't been properly organized in years. And then there was Rhett himself. He wasn't what she'd expected. He didn't hover or make demands or test boundaries. Most days she barely saw him. He was up before dawn, out working with his men, and didn't come back until after dark. When he did appear, he was polite but distant, taking his meals in his office more often than not. It should have made things easier. Instead, it made them more complicated. "He doesn't like us," Thomas announced at breakfast one morning, his lower lip jutting out in that way he had when his feelings were hurt. "He doesn't know us," Alara corrected, though she'd been thinking the same thing. "And he's a busy man." "He's sad," Lily said matter-of-factly, spreading butter on her bread with more enthusiasm than skill. "Like you were after Papa died." The observation, delivered with the brutal honesty only a 5-year-old could manage, made Alara's throat tighten. Out of the mouths of babes. Hannah said nothing, but Alara caught her daughter watching Rhett sometimes when he passed through the house, her expression thoughtful in a way that made Alara nervous. Hannah had always been too perceptive for her own good. The town's reaction to their presence was something else entirely. Alara discovered this on her second week when she accompanied Rhett into Red Creek to purchase supplies. The whispers started the moment they stepped out of the wagon. Women's faces appeared in windows, then disappeared. Men stopped their conversations to stare. And when Alara walked into Patterson's general store, the silence that fell was sharp enough to cut. "Mrs. Quinn." Bill Patterson's greeting was stiff, his smile not reaching his eyes. I hear you're working out at the Calder place now. That's right. She kept her voice steady, her chin up. She'd done nothing wrong, had nothing to be ashamed of. Must be quite a change from, well, he gestured vaguely, leaving the sentence unfinished but the meaning clear. From living like a vagrant to living in the finest house in the county. It's honest work, she said quietly, same as any other job. Of course, of course. But his tone said he didn't believe it for a second. The rumors were even worse than the stares. She heard them through the children who heard them from other kids in town. That she was Rhett's mistress. That she'd seduced him for his money. That she was taking advantage of a grieving widower, worming her way into his life and his home. They're saying terrible things about you, Mama, Hannah said one night, her voice tight with anger. Sarah Miller said you're a... She stopped, her face flushing. I told her she was a liar. And then? Elara asked, though she could already see the split knuckles on her daughter's hand. And then I may have pushed her into a mud puddle. Elara wanted to be angry, wanted to lecture her daughter about fighting and keeping her temper and being the bigger person, but instead she found herself pulling Hannah into a hug, holding her tight while they both pretended not to cry. I know it's hard, she whispered into her daughter's hair, but we can't control what people think. We can only control what we do. And we've done nothing wrong. Then why does it feel like we have? Elara didn't have an answer for that. A month into their arrangement, things reached a crisis point. It started with small things, supplies that went missing from the kitchen, equipment that broke at suspicious times. One of the ranch hands, a man named Caleb Worth, started showing up at odd hours, asking questions that felt more like interrogations than conversation. So how'd you end up here exactly? He asked one afternoon, leaning against the kitchen doorframe while Elara tried to work around him. Heard you were living rough before Rhett found you. I was. She didn't elaborate, didn't give him the satisfaction of more information. Must have been desperate. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Pretty woman like you, though. I'm sure you had options. The implication was clear. Elara's hands tightened on the knife she was using to chop vegetables. If you need something, Mr. Worth, ask. Otherwise, I have work to do. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Rhett's making a mistake, bringing strangers into his home. Some people around here aren't happy about it. Then those people can take it up with Mr. Calder. Oh, they will. He pushed off the doorframe, straightening. Trust me, they will. That night, Elara found Rhett in his office, hunched over paperwork that looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. She knocked on the open door, and he looked up, surprise crossing his face. Something wrong? That depends. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. You planning to tell me what's really going on around here? His expression shuddered immediately. What do you mean? I mean the whispers, the looks. Your own ranch hand practically threatening me in my kitchen. She crossed her arms. I may be desperate, Mr. Calder, but I'm not stupid. There's something happening here, and I deserve to know what I've walked into. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exhaustion she recognized all too well. You ever hear of Marcus Brennan? He asked finally. The banker? And landowner, and the man who's been trying to buy this ranch for the last 3 years. Rhett's voice was flat, matter of fact. I won't sell, so now he's trying other methods. What kind of methods? The kind that involve making me look unstable, unfit to manage my own property. He met her eyes. Bringing a desperate widow and her children into my home plays right into that narrative. Makes me look impulsive, emotionally compromised. Maybe even delusional. The words hit her like a slap. So I'm what? Bait? Evidence of your supposed instability? No. He stood abruptly, moving around the desk. That's not why I brought you here. I brought you here because you needed help and I could give it. The complications that came with it are my problem, not yours. Except they are my problem. Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. My children are getting bullied. I'm being called a whore in the street, And apparently we're all pawns in some land dispute I don't understand. See, but then leave. He said it harshly.
This story was
but there
posted on the
pain
channel
underneath.
The Rusty
Take
Saddle.
the kids and
Please
go.
do not
I'll give you
repost
enough
it in
money
any
to start
form.
somewhere new, somewhere nobody knows your face or makes assumptions about. No. The word came out harder than she'd intended. They both stopped, staring at each other across the dim office. No? He repeated. No. She took a breath, trying to organize her thoughts. You want to know why? Because for the first time in 8 months, my children are eating every day. They're sleeping in real beds. They're not terrified every night about where we'll be tomorrow. Her voice cracked slightly. So no, I'm not leaving. Not unless you throw me out. Something shifted in Rhett's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. Even if it makes things harder for you? Things have been hard before. I'll manage. They stood there in the growing darkness, the silence stretching between them. Then Rhett did something unexpected. He smiled. It was small, barely there, but genuine. You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Quinn. Had to be, she replied. And you can call me Alara. We're past formalities at this point. His smile widened slightly. Rhett, then, since we're apparently in this together now. The next morning, everything changed. Alara woke to the sound of horses and raised voices. She threw on her robe and rushed to the window, her heart pounding. A group of men had gathered in the yard, 6 or 7 of them, all mounted, all carrying rifles. At their head was a man she'd seen before in town, Marcus Brennan. Even from this distance, she could read the satisfaction on his face. She ran downstairs, reaching the front door just as Rhett stepped onto the porch. He'd clearly dressed in a hurry. His shirt was untucked, his hair uncombed, but his expression was calm, controlled. Gentlemen, he said evenly. Little early for a social call, isn't it? This isn't a social call, Calder. Brennan's voice carried across the yard. This is an intervention. That's so. We've been patient, tried to talk sense into you, but bringing that woman and her bastards into your home, that's where the line gets drawn. Alara felt her blood go cold. Behind her, she heard a small gasp. Hannah, standing at the top of the stairs with her siblings, their faces pale with fear. Choose your next words carefully, Brennan. Rhett's voice dropped to something dangerous. Real carefully. Or what? You'll shoot me in front of witnesses? Brennan gestured to the men flanking him. That'd just prove what we've been saying. You're unstable, dangerous, unfit to manage this property or any other. Is that what this is about? Still trying to steal my land? Steal? Brennan laughed. I'm trying to save it. You're clearly not in your right mind, Calder. Any man who'd risk his reputation, his business, his entire future for some woman he found in a barn, that's enough. Alara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. She stepped past Rhett onto the porch, ignoring his hand reaching to stop her. You want to insult me, Mr. Brennan? Fine. I've heard worse, but you leave my children out of this. Your children are exactly the issue, Mrs. Quinn. You've wormed your way into this man's home, into his life, using those kids as leverage. I've worked. Every day since I got here, I've worked. Cleaning his house, cooking his meals, earning my keep. There's nothing improper about it, no matter what your dirty mind imagines. Then why all the secrecy? Why not hire someone from town? Why bring in a stranger? Because no one in town would hire me. The words burst out of her, raw and honest. Because I was desperate and starving, and every door I knocked on slammed in my face. Because Mr. Calder offered help when no one else would, and I took it because I had 3 children to feed. Is that scandal enough for you? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to have stopped moving. Brennan's face darkened. Touching story. Doesn't change the facts. Calder's judgment is compromised. We have witnesses prepared to testify. Witnesses you paid. Rhett interrupted coldly. I know about that, by the way. About the money you've been spreading around town, buying statements from people who'll say whatever you want. Thought I wouldn't find out. Brennan's expression flickered, just for a moment, but enough to confirm it was true. You want to fight, Marcus? Fine. But understand this. You come after me. You come after my property. That's one thing. But you threaten this woman or her children again, and we're going to have a different kind of conversation. The kind that doesn't end with lawyers and paperwork. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. For a long moment, Brennan stared at them both. Then, slowly, he smiled. And that smile was worse than his anger had been. You just made a very big mistake, Calder. Both of you. He wheeled his horse around. We'll see you in court. They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Rhett and Alara standing on the porch in their wake. That was stupid, Rhett said quietly, not looking at her. You shouldn't have confronted him. Probably not. Definitely not. You just made yourself a target. I was already a target. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sun. At least this way he knows I'm not going to just disappear quietly. Rhett turned to look at her then, really look at her. Something in his expression was different, harder, yes, but also clearer, like he'd made a decision about something. You meant what you said last night? About staying? Yes? Even knowing what's coming, the scandal, the legal battle, all of it? She thought about her children upstairs, about the warm beds and full stomachs, about the first place in years that had felt like it could become home. Then she thought about running again, hiding again, starting over again in some new town where nobody knew them, but everyone would judge them just the same. Even knowing, she said firmly. He nodded slowly. Then we'd better get ready, because Marcus Brennan doesn't make threats he can't back up. This is about to get ugly. How ugly? Rhett looked out at the horizon, where the dust from Brennan's horses was still settling. Ugly enough that you might regret staying. But as Alara stood there beside him, feeling the weight of what was coming, she found herself thinking something she hadn't let herself believe in months. She was exactly where she needed to be. The legal papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a nervous-looking clerk who refused to meet Alara's eyes when she answered the door. She carried them to Rhett's office, her hand steady even though her stomach was churning. He looked up from the ledger he'd been studying, saw her expression, and held out his hand without a word. The silence as he read was worse than any reaction would have been. His jaw tightened with each page, a muscle jumping near his temple. Well? She asked when she couldn't stand the quiet anymore. They're filing for a competency hearing. His voice was flat, empty of emotion in a way that made her nervous. Claiming I'm mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They've got affidavits from half the town. People claiming I've been acting erratic, making poor business decisions, showing signs of instability. That's insane. That's Marcus Brennan. He dropped the papers on his desk like they were contaminated. He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every questionable decision I've made, every time I've lost my temper or been too generous or done anything that could be twisted the wrong way, he's been collecting evidence. Alara sank into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly unsteady. What happens if they win? They take everything. The ranch, the land, the house. They'll appoint a conservator to manage my affairs, which will conveniently be someone Brennan controls. And once he has legal authority, he'll sell it all off piece by piece. He paused. And you and the kids will be out on the street before the ink's dry on the paperwork. The casual way he said it, like it was just another business complication, made her angry. That's what you're worried about? That we'll lose our jobs? I'm worried about what happens to you when this all falls apart. His eyes met hers, and there was something raw in them. You think the town's been cruel to you now? Wait until they think you helped drive me to ruin. Wait until they decide you're the reason a pillar of the community lost everything. She hadn't thought of that. Hadn't considered that she might become the villain in this story, the scheming woman who destroyed a good man. The idea made her sick. Then we fight back. The words came out stronger than she felt. We find our own witnesses. We prove they're lying. With what? Most of the people who'd speak for me work for me. The court will claim they're biased. And everyone else? He laughed, but it was bitter. They either owe Brennan money or they're scared of him. Same difference. There has to be something. There isn't. He stood abruptly, moving to the window. I've been over it 100 times. He's got me boxed in. The only move that makes sense is damage control. What does that mean? He didn't answer right away. just stood there looking out at his land, his empire, everything he'd built over years of hard work. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. It means maybe you should take that offer I made. Money to start over somewhere new, before this gets any worse.
This story
The
was
suggestion
posted on the
hit her like
channel
cold
The
water.
Rusty Saddle.
You're trying to
Please
get
do not
rid of me.
repost it in any form.
I'm trying to protect you. By pushing me away, by letting them win. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. That's not protection, that's surrender. It's practical. He turned to face her. You've got 3 kids to think about, Ilara. They don't deserve to be dragged through this. And what do they deserve? To learn that when things get hard, you run? That when someone needs you, you abandon them? Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. My children have already lost one parent. I won't teach them to be cowards too. That's not fair. Neither is this. She grabbed the papers off his desk, shaking them at him. None of this is fair, but giving up doesn't make it better. It just means they win. They stared at each other across the office, both breathing hard. The tension between them was thick enough to choke on. Why? Rhett asked finally. Why do you care so much? You've been here 6 weeks. You don't owe me anything. Because you gave us shelter when no one else would. Because my kids are safe here. Because... She stopped, struggling to find words for something she barely understood herself. Because sometimes doing the right thing is reason enough. Something in his expression cracked, not breaking exactly, but softening around the edges. You really believe that? I have to, otherwise what's the point of any of this? He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him thinking, weighing, deciding. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, we fight. The relief that washed over her was so intense it made her dizzy. Okay, but we do it smart. No more confrontations like the one in the yard. No more giving them ammunition. He moved back to his desk, his mind already working through possibilities. We need to document everything, every conversation, every interaction. If they're going to claim I'm unstable, we prove I'm not. How? By running this ranch better than I ever have. By showing up at every town meeting, every church social, every place where people can see me being completely normal and rational. His mouth twisted. Even if it kills me. Ilara almost smiled. You hate town meetings. I hate losing more. Over the next weeks, that became their strategy. Rhett threw himself into being the model citizen, showing up early to meetings, making charitable donations, speaking calmly and reasonably, even when people baited him. It clearly cost him. Ilara could see the strain in the tight set of his shoulders, the exhaustion in his eyes when he came home late at night. But he never complained, never broke. Meanwhile, Ilara worked on the house with a determination that bordered on obsessive. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed. She organized closets and repaired curtains and turned the neglected mansion into something that looked like a real home. If anyone came to inspect the property, and she knew they would, they'd find nothing to criticize. The children adapted in their own ways. Thomas threw himself into his chores, desperate to be helpful. Lily, too young to fully understand the tension, continued being herself, chattering away about everything and nothing, a bright spot in increasingly dark days. But Hannah worried Ilara the most. Her daughter had always been serious, but now she was watchful in a way that seemed almost adult. She stopped playing with the few friends she'd made, started spending hours in her room, writing in a journal she thought Ilara didn't know about. Talk to me, Ilara said one evening, sitting on the edge of Hannah's bed. Tell me what you're thinking. Hannah kept her eyes on the journal in her lap. I'm writing down everything that happens. So if they try to lie about it later, we'll have proof. The practical ruthlessness of it broke Ilara's heart. Baby, you don't have to... Yes, I do. Hannah finally looked up, and her eyes were fierce. They're trying to take this away from us. This place, this life. Mr. Calder, I won't let them. It's not your job to protect us. It's not yours either, but you're doing it anyway. Hannah's voice cracked slightly. I'm not stupid, Mama. I know what people are saying about you, about all of us. And I know you're staying because of us, so the least I can do is help. Ilara pulled her daughter close, blinking back tears she refused to shed. When had Hannah gotten so old? When had she stopped being a child and become this fierce, determined young woman? "We're going to get through this," she whispered. "All of us. Together." Hannah nodded against her shoulder, but neither of them mentioned that they didn't actually know if that was true. The town's hostility grew worse as word of the competency hearing spread. What had been whispers became open confrontation. Someone threw a rock through the ranch house window with a note tied around it. Whore. Elara found it before the children did, grateful for small mercies. She stopped going into town except when absolutely necessary. The stares, the muttered insults, the way people would cross the street to avoid her. It was easier to just stay away. Let them think what they wanted. She had work to do, but isolation had its own cost. The ranch felt smaller every day, like the walls were closing in. And the tension between her and Rhett was getting harder to ignore. They'd fallen into patterns without discussing them. He'd started taking his evening coffee on the back porch, and she'd started bringing it to him there. They'd talk about the ranch, about the K's, about nothing in particular. Those conversations, brief as they were, became the best part of both their days. "You ever think about what you'd do?" he asked one evening, watching the sun set over his land. "If none of this had happened, if your husband hadn't died, if you hadn't ended up here?" Elara settled into the chair beside him, her own coffee warming her hands. "Sometimes we'd probably still be in that little house by the mine. Thomas would be learning to read. Hannah would be helping with Lily. It would be simple." "You miss it? The simplicity? Yes. The life?" She paused, considering. "I don't know anymore. That woman who lived there, she was different. Softer, maybe. Less cynical? Aware." She took a sip of coffee. "I didn't know how cruel people could be back then. How quickly they'd turn on you. Now I do." "That's a hard lesson." "Most of them are." She glanced at him. "What about you? What would you be doing if—" She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence delicately. "If my wife hadn't died?" He said it easily, without the flinch she'd expected. "Probably the same thing I'm doing now, working too hard. Neglecting the house. Making enemies." He smiled slightly. "Margaret used to say I had a gift for it. Making enemies." Was she right? Usually. His smile faded. "She was better at this than I ever was. The social part, I mean. Knowing what to say, how to act. People liked her in a way they'll never like me." "Maybe you're not supposed to be liked. Maybe you're supposed to be respected. Hard to get respect when half the territory thinks you've lost your mind. Then we change their minds." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You sound pretty confident about that. One of us has to be." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then Rhett cleared his throat and looked away. "You should go in. It's getting cold." It was a dismissal, gentle but clear. Elara stood, taking both their empty cups. At the door, she paused. "Rhett?" "Yeah?" "We're going to win this. I don't know how yet, but we will." She didn't wait for his response. Didn't need to see his face to know he didn't believe her. But she believed it, had to believe it, because the alternative was unthinkable. The turning point came from an unexpected source. Caleb Worth, the ranch hand who'd been so hostile when Elara first arrived, appeared in the kitchen one morning looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Need to talk to Rhett," he said without preamble. "Where is he?" "Out with the cattle. What's this about?" "Can't say. Not to you." But his eyes darted around the kitchen nervously, and his hands were shaking. Elara made a decision. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'll make sure he hears it." Caleb hesitated, then slumped into a chair like his strings had been cut. "Brennan came to see me last night, offered me $500 to testify at the hearing. Said all I had to do was claim I'd seen Rhett acting strange, talking to himself, making irrational decisions." Elara's heart started pounding. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell." Caleb looked up at her, his face haggard. "I don't like you, Mrs. Quinn. I've made that clear. But I've worked for Rhett Calder for 8 years, and he's the fairest man I've ever known. I won't lie about him for money. Not even that much money. Why are you telling me this? Because there were 3 other ranch hands with Brennan last night, and I don't think they all said no. He stood
This
abruptly.
story was posted on the channel The
needs to
Rusty
know.
Saddle.
He
Please do
needs
not
to know
repost
who
it
he
in
can
any
trust.
form.
After Caleb left, Alara stood in the kitchen trying to process what she'd just heard. This was it, the evidence they needed that Brennan was bribing witnesses. But how could they prove it? It was one man's word against another. Unless. The idea formed slowly, piece by piece. It was risky, possibly stupid, definitely not something Rhett would approve of, which was exactly why she wasn't going to tell him until after it was done. That night, after everyone was asleep, Alara slipped out of the house. She'd borrowed one of the horses earlier, tied it in a grove of trees where no one would notice. Now she rode toward town, her heart hammering against her ribs. Marcus Brennan lived in the biggest house in Red Creek, a 3-story monstrosity that looked more like a bank than a home. Lights still burned in the downstairs windows despite the late hour. Alara tied her horse out of sight and approached through the shadows. She'd spent the afternoon learning everything she could about Brennan's habits from the ranch hands. He kept his office on the first floor, southeast corner, and he was predictably arrogant about security, never locked his windows, convinced his reputation alone would protect him. The window slid open with barely a whisper. Alara climbed through, her hands shaking so badly she nearly knocked over a lamp. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive furniture, thick carpets, walls lined with legal books and ledgers. She started with the desk, working quickly through drawers and files. Most of it was standard business correspondence, nothing useful. But in the bottom drawer, locked but easily forced with a letter opener, she found what she was looking for: a ledger. Not the kind you showed to banks or business partners. The other kind. She flipped through pages, her eyes widening as she read. Payments to witnesses, bribes to court officials, a detailed list of everyone Brennan had bought or intimidated, along with amounts and dates. And there, near the back, payments to several of Rhett's ranch hands, including Caleb Worth, dated yesterday, even though he'd refused. Brennan had paid them anyway, was planning to claim they'd all agreed whether they actually had or not. Alara was so focused on the ledger that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hall until it was too late. The door opened. Light flooded in. Well. Marcus Brennan stood in the doorway, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a smile on his face that made her blood run cold. This is unexpected. Alara's mind raced through options. Run? He was blocking the door. Scream? No one would come. Fight? He was twice her size. Breaking and entering is a crime, Mrs. Quinn. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. You could go to jail for this. Probably will, once I testify about finding you here. I was just stealing evidence? Yes, I can see that. He nodded toward the ledger still clutched in her hands. The question is, what do we do about it? The way he said we made her stomach turn. Let me go. I'll leave right now. Forget I saw anything. Oh, I don't think so. He set down his whiskey, moving closer. See, you've created an opportunity here, a chance for us to come to an understanding. What kind of understanding? The kind where you convince Rhett Calder to sell me his ranch for a very reasonable price. And in return, I forget you were ever here. I might even forget about this whole competency hearing. His smile widened. Everyone wins. Except Rhett. Rhett's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. Brennan was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. But you're a survivor. I can see it. You do what you have to do to protect those kids of yours. That's admirable. Get away from me. Or what? He reached out and she jerked back, her hip hitting the desk hard. You're not in a position to make demands, Mrs. Quinn. You're a criminal caught in the act, a woman with a very questionable reputation who just proved everyone's worst assumptions right. He paused. Unless we make a deal. Alara's hand found the letter opener on the desk behind her. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was sharp, and she was desperate. I said, get away from me. Brennan saw the opener, and his expression darkened. Now you're threatening me? In my own home? He grabbed for her wrist, and she swung blindly. The sound of breaking glass made them both freeze. Then Rhett's voice, cold and deadly. Let her go. Now. Alara's head whipped toward the window. Rhett stood there, one leg already over the sill, and the look on his face was murderous. Behind him, she could see Caleb Worth and two other ranch hands. Brennan released her wrist like she'd burned him. Calder, this isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you were about to assault a woman in your office, after she caught you with evidence of witness tampering. Rhett climbed fully into the room, and the other men followed. Want to tell me which part I'm misunderstanding? She broke into my home. She was returning property you stole. Rhett's voice never rose, but somehow that made it more terrifying. That ledger? The one documenting every illegal thing you've done to steal my land? Pretty sure that belongs in a courtroom, not your desk drawer. Brennan's face had gone pale. You have no proof. We have the ledger. We have witnesses who'll testify you tried to bribe them. And we have you, on record, just now offering her a deal to make it all go away. Rhett smiled, and it was nothing like his usual expressions. This was predatory. Caleb, you get all that? One of the ranch hands held up a notebook. Every word, boss. The color drained from Brennan's face completely. You're bluffing. A judge would love to hear about how the respected Marcus Brennan has been bribing half the county to help him steal land from legitimate owners. About how he attempted to blackmail and assault a widow when she discovered his crimes. Rhett took the ledger from Alara's shaking hands. But here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to withdraw your petition for the competency hearing. You're going to stop spreading lies about me and about Mrs. Quinn, and you're going to leave this territory and never come back. Or every detail in this ledger becomes public, along with the testimony of everyone you tried to bribe. Your reputation won't just be damaged, it'll be destroyed, and that's before the criminal charges. Brennan looked around the room, seeing his defeat in every face. You're making a mistake. No, I'm ending one. Rhett moved toward the door, then paused. You have 48 hours to leave Red Creek. If I see you after that, we'll have a different kind of conversation. They left through the front door this time, Alara sandwiched between Rhett and Caleb, her legs barely holding her up. No one spoke until they were mounted and well clear of Brennan's property. Then Rhett turned to her, his face still hard. What the hell were you thinking? I was thinking we needed evidence. So you broke into his house, alone, at night? His voice rose with each question. Do you have any idea what could have happened? Yes! Her own voice cracked. Yes, I know exactly what could have happened, but I also knew we were running out of time and options, and someone had to do something. Not like this. Never like this. He looked genuinely shaken. When Caleb told me where you'd gone, when we got there and saw... He stopped, his jaw working. Don't ever do something that stupid again. Then don't ever try to push me away when things get hard. They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Then, unexpectedly, Rhett laughed. It was short and harsh, but genuine. You're impossible. I've been told. The ride back to the ranch was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. Something had shifted between them, changed in a way Alara couldn't quite name but could definitely feel. When they reached the house, Rhett dismounted first and came around to help her down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, he said quietly, for what you did tonight. Even if it was reckless and dangerous, and you already covered that part. Right. He smiled slightly. Still, thank you. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The way he was looking at her, the warmth in his eyes, it made her chest tight. We should get inside, she managed finally, before the kids wake up and wonder where we are. But neither of them moved. They stood there in the moonlight, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, and for just a moment, Alara let herself imagine what it would be like to close that final distance, to let herself want something more than just survival. Then Rhett stepped back, breaking the spell. Good night, Alara. Good night. She watched him walk toward the main house, his shoulders squared despite the exhaustion she knew he must be feeling. Then she turned toward her own quarters, her heart still racing for more than just the night's adventure. Everything was about to change. She could feel it, feel The question was whether they were ready for it. The morning after this break-in, Alara woke to the sound of horses and voices in the yard. For a horrible moment, she thought Brennan had come back with the sheriff, that everything they'd done last night had somehow made things worse. But when she looked out the window, she saw something different. A crowd. Not hostile this time, but curious. Word had spread fast. It always did in a town this size. By the time she got dressed and made it downstairs, there were at least 20 people gathered near the front porch where Rhett stood, the infamous ledger in his hands. "You all know why you're here," Rhett was saying, his voice carrying across the yard. "You've heard the rumors. Some of you believed them. Some of you helped spread them." He paused, letting that sink in. "But what you haven't heard is the truth." Alara stayed in the doorway, watching. The children pressed against her sides, sensing something important.
This story was posted on the channel The Rusty Saddle. Please do not repost it in any form.
Marcus Brennan has been buying testimony, paying people to lie about me, about my state of mind, about my decisions. He wanted my land badly enough to destroy my reputation to get it. He opened the book, reading names and amounts. Tom Wilson, $50 to claim I'd been acting erratic at the mill. Sarah Henderson, $75 to say I'd been making poor business deals. Jack Morrison, $200 to testify I'd threatened him. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Several people looked genuinely shocked. Others looked uncomfortable, like they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't wanted to admit it. The competency hearing was never about my mental state, Rhett continued. It was about theft. Legal theft, but theft all the same. And some of you helped him do it. "Where's Brennan?" someone called out. "Let him defend himself." "Gone. Left town early this morning with 2 suitcases and his tail between his legs." Rhett's smile was grim. "Turns out when you threaten a man with exposure of every illegal thing he's done for the last 5 years, he decides maybe Florida looks nice this time of year." A few people laughed, but it was nervous laughter, the kind that came when you realized you'd been fooled and didn't like how it felt. Bill Patterson, the store owner, stepped forward. "And what about the rest of it? The woman and her kids? That wasn't part of Brennan's scheme." The yard went quiet. This was the real question, the one everyone wanted answered, but nobody else had the courage to ask. "You're right," Rhett said evenly. "That was my decision, mine alone. I found a woman and 3 children in need, and I offered them work and shelter. Nothing more, nothing less. If that makes me unstable in your eyes, then I guess I am." "But why?" Patterson pressed. "Why risk your reputation for strangers?" Rhett looked at the man for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted, finding Alara in the doorway. Something passed between them, a question, maybe, or permission. She nodded slightly. "Because 3 years ago, when my wife died, this town showed up, brought food, offered help, made sure I didn't fall apart completely. I never forgot that." He turned back to the crowd. "So when I saw someone else who needed help, I gave it. Simple as that." "Except it wasn't simple," a woman's voice called out. "People talked, made assumptions." "People always talk," Rhett said flatly. "Doesn't make them right. Mrs. Quinn has worked harder than anyone I've ever employed. She's earned every penny I've paid her, and then some. The fact that some of you chose to see something ugly in that says more about you than it does about either of us." The words landed like stones. Several people in the crowd had the decency to look ashamed. Patterson cleared his throat. "What happens now? With the hearing?" Brennan withdrew his petition this morning before he left. "It's over." Rhett closed the ledger. "But I want to make one thing clear. I won't forget who stood by me and who didn't, who was willing to sell lies about me for Brennan's money. This town and I are going to have to figure out how to move forward from here." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even close. But it was honest, and that seemed to satisfy something in the crowd. People started to disperse, talking among themselves. Some looked relieved. Others looked like they'd just dodged a bullet they hadn't seen coming. Alara watched them go, feeling something complicated twist in her chest. Victory, yes, but it tasted bitter. They'd won, but at what cost? How many of those people would ever really trust them again? "Mama," Hannah tugged on her sleeve. "Is it really over?" "I think so, baby." "Good." Hannah's voice was fierce. "They should be ashamed of themselves." Elara pulled her daughter close, wishing she could protect her from the ugliness of adult politics. But Hannah had seen too much already. Had learned too young that people could be cruel for reasons that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with their own fears and greed. After the crowd dispersed, Rhett came inside looking exhausted. He dropped into a chair at the kitchen table while Elara poured him coffee. "That went better than I expected," he said, wrapping his hands around the mug like he needed the warmth. "Did it?" Elara set down her own cup. "Because it looked to me like half those people were only here to see if we'd hang ourselves." "Probably, but the other half were genuinely surprised by what Brennan did. That's something." He took a long drink. "At least now they know the truth." Knowing and believing are different things. "Yeah." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. The danger had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. Reputations could be repaired, but it took time. Trust, once broken, didn't just magically reassemble itself. "What do we do now?" Elara asked finally. Rhett looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. "We live. Keep working. Prove to everyone, including ourselves, that we made the right choices. And if they don't come around, if the town never accepts us, then we accept that." He set down his mug. "I've spent too much of my life worrying about what other people think. Maybe it's time to stop." The words were brave, but Elara could hear the cost in them. Rhett had built his entire life in this territory. His reputation had been everything. Choosing to let go of that, to prioritize something else, it wasn't easy for him. Might never be easy. "For what it's worth, Iti," she said quietly, "I think you made the right choice. Back at the barn, taking us in. Even with everything that came after? Especially because of everything that came after." She met his eyes. "You could have thrown us out the minute Brennan started making noise, protected yourself. But you didn't. Wouldn't have been right. Most people don't care about right when their whole life is on the line." He smiled slightly. "Well, I've never been accused of being most people." The moment stretched between them, comfortable in a way that felt dangerous. Elara found herself noticing things she'd been trying not to notice. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he was tired, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the exact shade of gray at his temples. She looked away quickly, busying herself with dishes that didn't need washing. "I should get started on lunch," she said, more to fill the silence than because it was true. "Elara," his voice stopped her. "What you did last night, breaking into Brennan's office, that was incredibly brave, and incredibly stupid, but mostly brave." She turned back to find him standing now, closer than she'd expected. "I wasn't being brave, I was being desperate. Sometimes they're the same thing." He hesitated, then reached out and gently touched her arm. "Thank you. For risking yourself for me. For us." The touch was brief, appropriate, nothing that anyone could criticize, but it sent electricity through her anyway, made her acutely aware of every inch of distance between them. "You're welcome," she managed. They stood there, not quite touching, but not quite apart, and Elara felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. This thing between them, whatever it was, had changed. Had been changing probably since that first night in the barn, but now there was nothing left to hide behind. No crisis to focus on, no immediate threat to distract them from the truth. She cared about him, more than she should, more than was safe, and from the way he was looking at her, she was pretty sure the feeling was mutual. The sound of children's voices in the hallway broke the moment. Rhett stepped back quickly, and by the time Thomas and Lily burst into the kitchen, there was a safe distance between them again. But Elara could still feel the ghost of his touch on her arm, warm and solid and impossible to ignore. Over the next week, something subtle shifted in the household. The tension that had been driving them all slowly eased, replaced by something that almost felt like peace. The children laughed more. Rhett started taking meals with them instead of hiding in his office. And Elara found herself singing while she worked, something she hadn't done since before her husband died. But the outside world was slower to change. When Elara went into town for supplies, the reactions were mixed. Some people nodded politely, acknowledging her presence. Others turned away, still unwilling to let go of their assumptions. And a very few, actually apologized. "I'm sorry for what I said about you," Sarah Henderson told her in the general store, her face red with embarrassment. "Brennan paid me to spread rumors, and I should have known better, should have questioned it." Alara didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to accept the apology gracefully, to be the bigger person.
This
But
story
another
was
part,
posted on the
the
channel
part
The
that
Rusty
remembered
Saddle.
every cruel
Please
word,
do not
every
repost
turn
it in
back,
any form.
wanted to make the woman suffer for it. "Why did you do it?" she asked instead. "Was the money really worth it?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "My husband's been out of work for 6 months. We were about to lose our house. When Brennan offered that money..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I convinced myself it wasn't really lying, that maybe the things he was saying were true, that I was just confirming what everyone already suspected. It was a weak justification, and they both knew it. But Alara also knew what desperation looked like, knew what it felt like to be backed into a corner with no good choices. "I forgive you," she said finally, surprising herself. "But I won't forget, and I'll never trust you again." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "That's fair. More than fair." As Alara left the store, she felt something complicated settle in her chest. The anger was still there, probably always would be, but alongside it was something else. Understanding, maybe. Or just exhaustion. She was tired of carrying rage around like a stone. That evening, she told Rhett about the conversation while they sat on the back porch with their coffee. It had become their routine, this quiet hour after the children were asleep and before the night closed in completely. "You're more forgiving than I am," Rhett said after she finished. "I'm not sure I could have done that. I'm not sure I did it for her. Might have done it for me." Alara stared out at the darkening landscape. "Anger takes so much energy. I'm tired of giving these people that power over me." "That's wise. That's survival." She took a sip of coffee. "My husband used to say that grudges are like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Never understood what he meant until now." Rhett was quiet for a moment. "You don't talk about him much. Your husband." "Don't I?" She thought about it, realized he was right. "I suppose I've been trying not to think about him, about that life. It feels like it happened to someone else. That's grief, makes the past feel unreal. You still miss her, your wife." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Every day, but differently now. At first it was this sharp thing, like something was physically wrong with me. Now it's more like..." He paused, searching for words. "Like a room in my house I don't go into anymore. It's still there. It's just not where I live." Alara understood that completely. What was she like? "Margaret?" He smiled, but it was sad. "She was everything I'm not. Patient, diplomatic. She could talk to anyone, make them feel like they mattered. I used to watch her at town gatherings and just marvel at it, how easy she made it look." "You loved her very much." "I did. Still do, I guess. You don't stop loving someone just because they're gone." He looked at Alara then, his expression unreadable. "But you learn to make room for other things, other people." The weight of those words hung between them. Other people. Was he talking about her? Or was she reading too much into everything because she wanted it to mean something it didn't? "I should go in," she said, standing quickly. "Morning comes early." "Alara, wait." He stood too, catching her hand. "I need to say something, and I'm probably going to mess it up, but I need to try." Her heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Okay. When I found you behind that barn, I told myself I was just helping someone who needed it, that it was charity, or guilt, or whatever else I could name that felt safe." He took a breath. "But somewhere along the way, it became something else. You became something else, and I don't know what to do with that. Rhett, let me finish." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "You're smart and brave, and you don't take anyone's nonsense. You've made this house feel like a home again, made me feel like..." He stopped, struggling. "Like maybe I'm not just surviving anymore. Like maybe there's something more." Alara's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have feelings for you, real ones. The kind that keep me awake at night wondering if you feel the same way, or if I'm just a lonely widower reading too much into kindness." He laughed, but it was shaky. "And I'm saying I have no idea what to do about any of it." She should have seen this coming, should have been prepared, but hearing him say it out loud still felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea if there was water below. "I do," she whispered. "Feel the same way, I mean. I have for a while now." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it hurt to see. "Yeah? Yeah, but Rhett." She pulled her hand back gently. "This is complicated. We're complicated. I've got 3 children who've already been through too much. You've got a town watching your every move, and we've barely known each other 3 months. I know all that. And I'm not—" She struggled to find the words. "I'm not Margaret. I can't be what she was. I'm rough around the edges, and I don't have patience for social games, and I'll probably embarrass you at every fancy event you have to attend. I don't want you to be Margaret." He said it firmly, without hesitation. "I want you to be you, rough edges and all. You say that now, I say it, period." He reached for her hand again. "Elara, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking if you'd be willing to see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations, just seeing." She looked at him. This man who'd given her everything when she had nothing, who'd fought for her when the whole town turned against them, who was standing here now, vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. "Okay," she said softly. "We can see." The smile that broke across his face was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. He pulled her close, and she let him, resting her forehead against his chest and listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "This is probably a mistake," she murmured. "Probably." His arms tightened around her. "But I'm tired of playing it safe." They stood there under the stars, holding each other while the night settled around them, and for the first time since her husband died, Elara let herself hope for something more than just survival. The next morning brought reality crashing back in the form of a rider from town. Elara saw him coming from the kitchen window and immediately knew something was wrong from the speed of his approach. Rhett met him in the yard, and she watched their conversation through the glass, seeing his expression darken with each passing moment. When the rider left, Rhett stood there for a long minute, just staring at the dust cloud in his wake. Elara met him at the door. "What is it?" "Town meeting tonight, emergency session." His voice was flat. "Someone's demanding a public accounting of what happened with Brennan. They want answers." "But you already explained." "I explained to the people who showed up here. Not everyone did, and apparently there are questions about the legality of what we did. Taking that ledger, forcing Brennan to leave town." He rubbed his face tiredly. "They're calling it vigilante justice. That's ridiculous. He was the one breaking the law. Doesn't matter. We didn't go through proper channels. Didn't involve the sheriff or the courts. We handled it ourselves." He looked at her. "And now we're going to have to answer for it." The meeting was held at the town hall, a drafty building that smelled of old wood and stale coffee. By the time Elara and Rhett arrived, it was already packed. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, faces ranging from curious to hostile. Judge William Mercer sat at the front, a stern man in his 60s who'd presided over the territory's legal matters for longer than most people could remember. He banged his gavel as they entered, and the room fell silent. "Mr. Calder, Mrs. Quinn, thank you for coming." His tone suggested it wasn't really a request. "I think you know why we're here." "I can guess," Rhett said evenly. "But why don't you tell me anyway?" "There are concerns about your actions regarding Marcus Brennan. Specifically, whether those actions were legal, whether they constituted intimidation, theft, or harassment." Mercer folded his hands. "These are serious allegations." "Serious allegations require serious evidence. Do you have any?" "We have Brennan's statement filed this morning from his new residence in Florida. He claims you broke into his home, stole his property, and threatened him with violence if he didn't leave town." A murmur ran through the crowd. Elara felt her stomach drop. Of course Brennan would try one last move. Of course he'd twist everything to make himself the victim. "That's interesting," Rhett said calmly. Because what actually happened was that Mrs. Quinn discovered Brennan's ledger documenting years of witness tampering and bribery, crimes he committed against not just me, but half this town. When we confronted him with evidence of his illegal activities, he chose to leave rather than face prosecution. Do you have this ledger? Rhett produced it, handing it to the judge. Names, dates, amounts, all in Brennan's own handwriting. I'm sure you'll recognize several prominent
This story was
citizens who
posted
took
on the
his money
channel
to
The
lie
Rusty
under oath.
Saddle. Please do not
Mercer
repost it
flipped
in
through
any
the
form.
pages, his expression darkening. The room had gone absolutely silent, everyone straining to hear. The judge stopped, closing the ledger. This is damning, but it doesn't change the fact that you took it from his home without authorization, that you confronted him without law enforcement present, that you gave him an ultimatum that amounted to extortion. So what was I supposed to do? Rhett's voice rose for the first time. Go through proper channels, file a complaint with a sheriff who's been on Brennan's payroll for years, wait for a legal system that he'd already corrupted to somehow find justice? He looked around the room. How many of you would have done the same thing in my position? How many of you would have just rolled over and let him take everything you'd worked for? Nobody answered, but Alara could see faces in the crowd, expressions shifting from hostile to thoughtful. The law exists for a reason, Mercer said. We can't have people taking justice into their own hands. Then maybe the law should work better. Alara's voice cut through the tension. Every head turned toward her. With all due respect, Judge, Mr. Calder did try to go through proper channels. He tried to defend himself against false charges. He tried to prove his competence in the face of manufactured evidence. And at every turn he was blocked by people Brennan had bought or intimidated. Mrs. Quinn, I'm not finished. She stepped forward, her hands shaking but her voice steady. I was there that night. I'm the one who found the ledger, who broke into Brennan's office. If anyone should be charged with a crime, it's me, not Mr. Calder. He was just trying to protect me from my own stupid decision. Rhett shot her a look that clearly said, "What are you doing?" but she ignored it. This was the truth, and it needed to be said. I broke the law, she continued. I knew it was wrong when I did it, but I also knew that if I didn't, an innocent man was going to lose everything because of lies and corruption. So yes, I broke into that office, I took that ledger, and I'd do it again if I had to. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Mercer stared at her like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. You're confessing to breaking and entering? I'm confessing to doing what needed to be done when the system failed. She looked around the room. How many of you took Brennan's money? How many of you knew something was wrong but didn't say anything because it was easier to go along? You want to talk about justice? Let's talk about all of it, not just the parts that are convenient. Someone in the back started to applaud. Then someone else joined in, and suddenly half the room was clapping while the other half looked uncomfortable. Judge Mercer banged his gavel. Order! I'll have order! When the room quieted, he fixed Alara with a hard stare. That was quite a speech, Mrs. Quinn, but it doesn't change the legal reality. Then what is the legal reality? Rhett demanded. You going to arrest her? Charge her with saving my life and my ranch? Because I guarantee you won't find a jury in this territory willing to convict. Mercer was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. The political calculation was obvious. Prosecuting Alara would make him deeply unpopular with a significant portion of the community, but letting it go would set a precedent he probably wasn't comfortable with. Finally, he sighed. I'm going to take this ledger as evidence. I'm going to launch an investigation into everyone named in it, and I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. He looked at both of them. You got lucky, both of you, because the law you broke was in service of exposing greater crimes. But don't mistake my leniency for approval. Next time, if there is a next time, things will go very differently. It wasn't quite vindication, but it was close enough. As they left the town hall, several people stopped them to shake Rhett's hand or thank Alara for speaking up. Not everyone. There were still plenty of cold stares and turned backs, but enough that it felt like maybe, possibly, the tide was turning. You shouldn't have done that, Rhett said when they were finally alone in the wagon. Confessed like that. You could have been arrested. So could you. That's different. Why? Because you're a man? Because you're rich and powerful and supposed to protect helpless women? She shook her head. I'm not helpless, Rhett, and I'm tired of pretending I need protection for my own choices. He looked at her for a long moment, then laughed. A real laugh, full of genuine amusement. You know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. Glad you finally figured that out. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, the tension of the evening slowly draining away. When they pulled into the yard, the house was dark except for a single lamp in the window. Hannah, keeping watch until they returned. Thank you, Rhett said as he helped her down from the wagon, for standing up for me in there. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. We're in this together, remember? Together. He tested the word like it was new. I like the sound of that. So did she. More than she probably should. As autumn deepened into the first breath of winter, something unexpected happened. The town didn't forgive them overnight, nothing that dramatic or clean. But slowly, grudgingly, it began to accept that maybe Rhett Calder and Alara Quinn weren't the scandal everyone had wanted them to be. Judge Mercer's investigation into Brennan's ledger helped. Names came out, prominent names, people who'd been so quick to judge Rhett and Alara while hiding their own corruption. The whispers shifted direction, focusing on those who'd been exposed rather than those who'd done the exposing. But acceptance wasn't the same as approval, and Alara felt that distinction every time she went to town. People were polite now, civil even, but there was always that pause, that calculation in their eyes, like they were still deciding what to make of her. They're waiting for you to mess up, Hannah said one morning, her perception as sharp as ever. She was helping Alara hang laundry, her hands quick and efficient, waiting to see if you'll prove them right after all. Let them wait. Alara pinned a sheet to the line with more force than necessary. I'm done worrying about what people think. Are you? Hannah's tone was skeptical. Because you've been checking the mirror a lot more lately before we go anywhere. Alara opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. Her daughter was right. She had been more careful about her appearance, more conscious of how she presented herself. When had that started? She knew exactly when. The night Rhett had told her how he felt. The night everything shifted from survival into something messier and more complicated. They'd been careful since then, maintaining proper distance in public, keeping things appropriate around the children. But in private, in those stolen moments on the back porch, or in the quiet of the evening, something was building between them that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Things are different now, Alara said finally, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Calder and I were trying to figure out what this is, what we are to each other, and that means being mindful of how it looks. Hannah was quiet for a moment, hanging one of Thomas's shirts. Do you love him? The question caught Alara completely off guard. Hannah, it's not a trick question, Mama. I just want to know. Alara looked at her daughter, this girl who'd grown up too fast, who'd seen too much. She deserved honesty, even when honesty was complicated. I don't know yet, she said slowly. I care about him. A lot. He's been good to us, and he's a good man. But love... She struggled with the word. Love takes time, and we haven't had that much of it. You loved Papa right away. You told me that story, remember? How you knew the first day you met him. That was different. We were different people then. I was 17 and stupid and thought love was supposed to feel like lightning striking. Alara paused. This feels more like coming in from the cold. Gradual, warm, safe. Hannah considered this. Is that better or worse? I don't know. Ask me in a year. But even as she said it, Alara wondered if she'd have a year to figure it out. Because for all the progress they'd made, for all the acceptance they'd earned, there was still a fundamental question they hadn't addressed. What exactly were they to each other? And what did they want to be? That question came to a head 2 weeks later when Rhett's sister arrived unannounced. Alara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the commotion in the front yard. Horses, voices, and then Rhett's tone, surprised and not entirely pleased. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to investigate. The woman standing on the porch was everything Alara wasn't. Elegant, perfectly dressed, her hair styled in a way that probably took an hour to achieve. She was younger than Rhett by a few years, maybe 35, with the same dark hair and sharp features, but softer somehow, more refined. Catherine, Rhett was saying, his voice strained. What are you doing here? Visiting my only brother, obviously. Catherine's smile was bright but didn't reach her eyes. Can't a sister drop by without an interrogation? You live 300 miles away. You don't just drop by. Well, maybe I missed you. She finally noticed Ilara standing in the doorway. And you must be the famous
This story
Mrs.
was posted
Quinn.
on the channel
I've
The
heard
Rusty
so much
Saddle.
about you.
Please do not
The
repost
way
it
she
in
said
any
it made
form.
it clear that what she'd heard hadn't been flattering. Ilara straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. Mrs. Calder, I assume. Miss Calder, actually, never found a man worth the trouble of marriage. Catherine swept past Ilara into the house like she owned it. My goodness, Rhett, the place actually looks clean. That's new. Rhett shot Ilara an apologetic look as he followed his sister inside. Catherine, if you came here to cause trouble. Trouble? Me? She laughed, but it had an edge to it. I came because I heard disturbing rumors about my brother's mental state and wanted to see for myself. Imagine my surprise when I discovered those rumors were started by Marcus Brennan, who apparently fled town in disgrace. She turned, pinning them both with a sharp gaze. Care to explain what's been happening here? Over dinner, awkward and tense despite Ilara's best efforts, Rhett filled his sister in on everything. Catherine listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. The children ate in silence, clearly sensing the tension. Even Lily, usually so chatty, kept her eyes on her plate. So, let me make sure I understand that, Catherine said when Rhett finished. You took in a widow and her 3 children, got embroiled in a legal battle that nearly cost you everything, and somehow emerged victorious by essentially blackmailing your enemy into leaving town. She paused. Have I got that right? That's a very reductive summary, Rhett said tightly. But accurate? Technically. Catherine set down her fork with deliberate precision. And now what? You're just playing house with this woman and her children, pretending to be a family? The words hit like a slap. Ilara saw Hannah stiffen, saw Thomas's eyes fill with tears. Her own face burned with humiliation and rage. That's enough, Rhett said, his voice dangerously quiet. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a man who's so lonely he'll take whatever companionship he can find, even if it means risking his reputation and his future. Catherine looked at Ilara. No offense, Mrs. Quinn, but you have to see how this looks. You were desperate, he was vulnerable, and now you're both in this situation that benefits you far more than it benefits him. I think you should leave. Ilara kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Children, go to your rooms. But, Mama, Thomas started. Now! They fled, and Ilara was grateful. They didn't need to hear any more of this, didn't need to know that even now, even after everything, people still saw them as opportunists and charity cases. You don't get to come into my home and insult my family, Ilara said once the children were gone. I don't care who you are or what you think you know. You have no idea what we've been through. Oh, I have some idea. You've been through hard times, found a wealthy benefactor, and now you're making sure he stays invested in you and your children. Catherine's smile was cold. It's a tale as old as time. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Catherine challenged. You're not married. You're living under his roof, raising your children on his dime, and apparently engaging in some sort of undefined relationship that gives you all the benefits of being his wife without any of the commitment. How is that not taking advantage? Catherine. Rhett stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. That's my last warning. Your last warning before what? You throw me out too? I'm your sister, Rhett, the only family you have left, and I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I'm making is letting you stay here another minute. His voice was cold in a way Ilara had never heard. Ilara is not taking advantage of me. She's worked harder than anyone I've ever employed. She's earned her place here, and what's between us, that's none of your business. What is between you, Chatra? Catherine pressed. Are you courting her, engaged to her, or is this just some convenient arrangement where you both get what you need without any actual commitment? The question hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. Alara found herself holding her breath, waiting for Rhett's answer. Because Catherine was right about one thing. They'd never actually defined what they were to each other. Had never put words to this thing growing between them. I love her. The words came out flat, matter of fact, like Rhett was stating something obvious. Is that what you wanted to hear? I'm in love with Alara Quinn, and I don't give a damn what you or anyone else thinks about it. The silence that followed was absolute. Alara stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. He'd never said that before. They danced around it, implied it, but neither of them had spoken that word out loud. Catherine recovered first. You barely know her. I know enough. I know she's brave and smart, and she doesn't back down from anything. I know her children are good kids who deserve better than what life's given them. I know that for the first time in 3 years, I actually want to wake up in the morning. He turned to Alara. And I know that I'm tired of pretending this is anything other than what it is. Which is, Alara's voice came out barely above a whisper, a second chance, for both of us. He moved closer, and she could see her own fear reflected in his eyes. If you want it. Catherine made a disgusted sound. This is insane. You're both deluding yourselves. She needs your money, and you need someone to make you feel less alone. That's not love, that's mutual desperation. Get out! Rhett didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. Pack your things and leave. Tonight. Rhett, I mean it. You're not welcome here anymore. Catherine looked between them, clearly trying to decide if he was serious. Whatever she saw in his face convinced her. She stood, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Fine. But when this falls apart, and it will, don't come crying to me. She paused at the door, looking back at Alara. You think you've won something here, but all you've done is trap yourself in a life that will never fully accept you. The town will always see you as the desperate widow who seduced a grieving man. And eventually, he'll see it too. Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Alara stood frozen, Catherine's words echoing in her head. Was she right? Had they been fooling themselves this whole time? Was this really love, or just two lonely people clinging to each other? Don't, Rhett said quietly. Don't let her get in your head. She's your sister. She knows you better than I do. She knows who I was, not who I am now. He crossed to her, taking her hands. And yeah, maybe she's right that we're both carrying baggage, that we came to this from broken places. But that doesn't make it less real. Doesn't it? Alara pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. We've been so focused on surviving, on fighting everyone else, that we never stop to ask if this actually makes sense. If we make sense, we make sense to me. That's not enough. The words came out harsher than she intended. I have 3 children to think about, Rhett. 3 kids who've already lost one father. I won't let them get attached to you if this is just going to fall apart. It's not going to fall apart. You don't know that. Nobody knows that. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Your sister is right about one thing. I do need you. I need your protection, your resources, your name. And that makes everything complicated because I can never be sure if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude wrapped up in pretty words. Is that really what you think? He looked genuinely hurt. That you're only here because you need me? I don't know what I think anymore. She turned away, unable to look at him. Everything happened so fast. We went from employer and employee to whatever this is, and we never took time to figure out if it was real or just circumstantial. So, what do you want to do? Go back to how things were? Pretend we don't have feelings for each other? I don't know. It was the most honest thing she'd said all night. I just know that I'm scared. Scared that we're making a mistake. Scared that your sister is right and we're just using each other. Scared that I'll hurt you the way your husband did by dying. He said it gently, but the words still landed like stones. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You're terrified of losing someone again. The accuracy of it took her breath away. Yes, that was exactly what she was afraid of, that she'd let herself love him fully and completely, and then something would happen, an accident, an illness, anything. And she'd be right back where she started, alone and broken with 3 children depending on her. I can't promise I won't die, Rhett continued. Nobody can, but I can promise that for whatever time we have, I'll show up. I'll fight for you and your kids. I'll be the man you deserve. And if that's not enough, her voice cracked. If I'm too damaged to ever fully trust this, then we work through it, together.
This story
He
was
reached for her
posted on
again,
the
and this
channel The
time she
Rusty
didn't pull
Saddle.
away.
Please do not
Laura,
repost it in any
I'm
form.
not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm just asking you not to give up on us before we've really started. She looked up at him, at this man who'd saved her life without even knowing her, who'd fought for her when the whole town turned against them, who was standing here now offering her something she wasn't sure she deserved. I'm a mess, she whispered. I'm angry and scared, and I don't know how to do this. How to love someone again when it hurt so much the first time. I know. I'm a mess too. He smiled slightly. Maybe that's why this works. We're both too broken to have any illusions about perfect romance or easy answers. We just have this, right now, right here. And maybe that's enough to start with. Maybe it was. Maybe perfect wasn't possible, but real was. Maybe love didn't have to be lightning striking. Maybe it could be what she'd told Hannah, coming in from the cold. Gradual, warm, safe. She let him pull her close, resting her head against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, reassuring, real. I need time, she said into his shirt. Not to decide if I want this, because I already know I do, but to figure out how to want it without being terrified all the time. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet kitchen while the evening deepened into night. And slowly, Alara felt some of the fear ease. Not all of it, probably never all of it, but enough to breathe, enough to hope. The sound of small footsteps made them pull apart. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face puffy from crying. Is she gone? He asked in a small voice. The mean lady? Yeah, buddy, she's gone. Rhett crouched down to Thomas's level. And I'm sorry you had to hear all that. She said we were pretending to be a family. Thomas's lower lip trembled. But we're not pretending. This is real. Alara's heart broke all over again. She knelt beside Rhett, pulling her son close. You're right. This is real. We are a family. So Mr. Calder is staying. He's not going to send us away. Never, Rhett said firmly. You're stuck with me now, whether you like it or not. Thomas thought about this, then nodded seriously. Okay, that's good then. He paused. Are you going to marry my mama? The question caught them both off guard. Alara felt her face heat, but Rhett just smiled. I'd like to, but that's up to your mama. He looked at Alara. When she's ready. Okay. Thomas seemed satisfied with this answer. Can I have a cookie before bed? The shift from serious to mundane was so typically Thomas that both adults laughed. Alara got him his cookie and sent him back upstairs, where she could hear Hannah reading to Lily in soothing tones. You're good with them, she told Rhett once they were alone again. The kids, you're really good with them. They make it easy. They're great kids. They are, but they're also complicated and loud, and they'll probably drive you crazy sometimes. She managed a small smile. Fair warning. I'll survive. He pulled her close again. We'll all survive. Together. That word again. Together. It felt less scary now than it had an hour ago. Still terrifying, but manageable. Like maybe they could actually do this. The next morning brought a surprise. A delegation from town, not hostile this time, but hopeful. Bill Patterson led them, looking uncomfortable but determined. Mr. Calder, Mrs. Quinn, we'd like to talk to you both if you have a minute. They gathered in the front yard, a group of about 10 people Alara recognized from various encounters around town. Some had been neutral in the whole Brennan affair. Others had actively helped spread rumors, but they were all here now, looking sheepish. We owe you an apology, Patterson said, the words clearly difficult. Several apologies, actually. We let ourselves get caught up in Brennan's schemes, believed things we should have questioned, treated you both in ways that were, he struggled for the right word, unchristian. We're not looking for apologies, Rhett said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to them either. Well, you're getting them anyway, along with something else. Patterson pulled out a piece of paper. We took up a collection. For Mrs. Quinn and her children. It's not much, but it's a start toward making things right. Alora stared at the paper. A bank draft for $200. It was more money than she'd seen in years, more than she knew what to do with. I can't accept this, she said automatically. Why not? This came from Sarah Henderson, the woman who'd apologized in the general store. We took from you, your dignity, your peace of mind. This is just money. It doesn't even come close to making us even. But take it, Patterson interrupted. Use it for the kids. Start a savings account. Buy yourself something nice. Whatever you want. Just take it and let us feel a little less guilty about how we treated you. Alora looked at Rhett, who shrugged. Your choice. She took the draft, her hands shaking slightly. Thank you. This is very generous. It's overdue. Patterson looked at Rhett. We also wanted to say that we support whatever you two decide to do. About your situation, I mean. If you want to court her properly, marry her, whatever, you have the town's blessing. The presumption of it should have been offensive. Who were they to give permission for how Rhett and Alora conducted their relationship? But there was something almost touching about it too. A peace offering, a bridge being built. We'll keep that in mind, Rhett said dryly. After they left, Alora stood staring at the bank draft in her hands. $200. Freedom money. Escape money. The kind of nest egg that meant she'd never be completely desperate again. What are you thinking? Rhett asked. That I could leave now, if I wanted to. I'd have enough to start over somewhere new. Take the kids somewhere nobody knows us. Is that what you want? She looked at him, at this man who'd become so much more than just her employer. At the house behind him that had become home, at the future stretching out before them, uncertain but possible. No, she said finally. No, I don't think it is. His smile was worth more than any amount of money. Good, because I wasn't sure what I'd do if you said yes. Probably find another desperate widow to take in. There's only one desperate widow I'm interested in, and she's not that desperate anymore. He was right. She wasn't. For the first time in nearly a year, Alora felt like she was standing on solid ground. There were still questions, still uncertainties, still fear lurking at the edges. But there was also hope. And that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, she gathered the children together and told them everything. About the money, about the town's apology, about what might happen next between her and Rhett. Are you going to marry him? Hannah asked, always direct. Maybe. Eventually, if he asks properly and I decide I can handle his terrible morning moods. Hey, Rhett protested from the doorway, where he'd apparently been eavesdropping. My morning moods are perfectly reasonable. You're grumpy until you've had at least 2 cups of coffee, Thomas informed him seriously. Mama makes you the coffee so you'll stop scowling at everyone. Betrayed by a 7-year-old, Rhett said, but he was smiling. Should I be worried about what else you're all saying about me? Probably, Hannah said. But we say nice things too, like how you fixed my doll's arm when it broke, and how you let Thomas help with the horses even though he's too small, and how you made Mama smile again. The last one hit differently than the others. Alora felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't know how to name. Well, Rhett said after a pause, I guess that's pretty good then. It is, Lily announced, climbing into his lap like she'd done 100 times before. You're our family now. Families stay together. Out of the mouths of babes. Alora met Rhett's eyes over Lily's head, saw her own emotions reflected there. This was real. Whatever they'd built here, however imperfect and complicated, it was real, and it mattered. Yes, she said softly, families stay together. And for the first time since her husband died, Alora let herself believe that might actually be true. Winter came hard that year, the first snow falling in thick white curtains that transformed the ranch into something out of a storybook. Alara watched it from the kitchen window while kneading bread dough, her hands working the rhythm her mother had taught her decades ago. The children were in the front room with Rhett, their laughter cutting through the quiet house like sunlight. She'd been here almost 6 months now, half a year since that desperate night behind the blacksmith's barn when she'd had nothing and nowhere to go. It felt like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at once. "Mama!" Thomas burst into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Calder says if the snow keeps up, we can build a fort tomorrow. A real one with walls and everything." "Does he now?" Alara tried to sound stern but couldn't quite manage it. "And who's going to do all the shoveling required for this fort?" "We will! All of us!" He grabbed her hand, tugging, "Come see the plans." Hannah drew them, and everything. She let herself be pulled into the front room, where Hannah had indeed sketched out elaborate blueprints on the back of an old ledger page. Rhett sat on the floor with Lily in his lap, both of them studying the drawings with the seriousness of military strategists. "See, we'll need a parapet here," Hannah was explaining, pointing to her crude drawing. "For defense."
This story was posted
maybe a
on the
supply
channel The
depot
Rusty
in the back
Saddle.
corner.
Please do not
"What
repost
exactly are
it
we
in any
defending
form.
against?" Rhett asked, amused. "Invaders, obviously." Hannah looked at him like he was dense. Or maybe just Thomas when he gets annoying. "Hey," Thomas protested, launching himself at his sister. They tumbled together, laughing and wrestling with the casual violence of siblings who knew exactly how far they could push. Alara watched Rhett watching them, saw the expression on his face, part longing, part contentment. He'd mentioned once that he and Margaret had wanted children, but it had never happened. Some things just didn't work out that way, he'd said, like it didn't matter anymore. But she could see that it did, that having her children here, filling his house with noise and chaos, meant something to him. "Your mama's right, though," Rhett said, gently extracting himself from Lily's grip. "Building a snow fort is serious work. We'll need everyone on their best behavior and working together." "We can do that," Hannah said, suddenly serious. "We're good at working together now." It was true. Over the months, they'd fallen into rhythms that felt natural. The children had chores they actually completed without much complaint. Rhett had stopped treating them like guests and started treating them like family, which meant he'd yell at Thomas for leaving the barn door open or remind Hannah to put away her books. Real things. Normal things. That night, after the children were asleep, Alara found Rhett on the back porch despite the cold. He had his coat on, but no hat, snowflakes catching in his dark hair like stars. "You'll freeze out here," she said, but she sat beside him anyway, pulling her shawl tight. Couldn't sleep, too quiet. She understood. The house was never quiet anymore, not really. Even at night there were sounds, Thomas talking in his sleep, Lily's soft snoring, Hannah's restless movements as she shifted positions. They'd become the soundtrack of this place. "Been thinking about something," Rhett said after a pause. "About what happens next." Alara's stomach tightened. Here it was. The conversation they'd been dancing around for weeks. Ever since his sister's visit, ever since the town's apology, they'd been in this strange holding pattern. Together, but not quite. Committed, but undefined. "Okay," she said carefully. "I want to marry you." He said it simply, without preamble or romance. "Not because it's proper, or because the town expects it. Because I wake up every morning and the best part of my day is knowing you'll be there. Because your kids have become my kids in every way that matters. Because I'm tired of pretending this is temporary when we both know it's not." Alara's heart was hammering, but she made herself think, made herself be practical. "Marriage is a big step. I know. It would change everything. The children would take your name, officially become yours. I'd become Mrs. Calder, with all the expectations and responsibilities that come with it." She looked at him. "Are you sure you're ready for that? Really sure?" "Are you?" The question turned it back on her, made her examine her own fears and hesitations. Was she ready? To tie her life permanently to his, to give up the independence she'd fought so hard to maintain, to trust someone that completely again? "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants it so much it scares me, but another part..." She stopped, struggling for words. I've been on my own for almost a year now, making decisions, taking care of my kids without anyone's help, and I like that person I became, that strong, independent woman who doesn't need rescuing. I'm not trying to rescue you. I know, but marriage, it changes the power dynamic. Legally, I'd become yours. My property, my rights, my children, all of it would be under your control. She met his eyes. How do I trust that you won't use that against me someday? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. You can't, not completely. That's what trust is. A leap into uncertainty. He reached for her hand. But I can promise you this. I'll put it in writing, a contract that gives you rights most wives don't have. Control over your own money, say, in decisions about the children. Protection if... He paused. If I die or if things go wrong between us. That's not exactly romantic. No, but it's honest, and I think we're past the point of pretty lies. He was right. They'd built this relationship on truth, however uncomfortable. Starting their marriage with anything less would be a betrayal of that. Okay, she said slowly, but I have conditions too. Name them. I want to keep working, not as your housekeeper, as your partner. I want to be involved in ranch decisions, have a real say in how things are run. She took a breath. And I want the children to have equal shares in whatever you leave behind, not because I'm trying to steal from you, but because they deserve security. Done. Anything else? I want you to court me properly first. Not a long courtship, we're past that, but something, flowers maybe. A proper proposal where you actually get on one knee and ask instead of just declaring intentions on a freezing porch. He laughed, and it was warm and genuine. I can do that, though fair warning, I'm not very good at romance. Neither am I. We'll figure it out together. Together. He tested the word again, like he still couldn't quite believe it. I like the sound of that. They sat in companionable silence, watching snow fall over the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Closer by, one of the horses nickered softly, the sounds of this place, their place, settling in for the night. When? Ilara asked finally. When what? When do you want to get married? He considered. Spring? Give us time to do it right. Have a proper ceremony. Let the town see we're serious about this. Spring. 3 months away. It felt both too soon and not soon enough. Spring, she agreed. True to his word, Rhett courted her over the following weeks. It was awkward and sweet, and nothing like the romance novels Hannah had started sneaking from town. He brought her flowers that he'd clearly picked himself, the stems unevenly cut. He took her on a buggy ride that ended with them stuck in a snowdrift for 2 hours. He tried to cook her dinner and nearly burned down the kitchen, but he showed up. Every day in small ways and large, he showed up. And slowly, Ilara's remaining fears began to ease. The children reacted to the engagement with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Lily was thrilled, immediately planning a wedding that involved 17 kinds of cake and dancing bears. Thomas was cautiously pleased, mostly concerned with whether this meant he could call Rhett Papa, or if that was disrespectful to his father's memory. Hannah, predictably, was the holdout. What if it doesn't work? She asked Ilara one night while they were mending clothes. What if you get married and then something goes wrong and we're stuck? Stuck how? Just stuck. Dependent on him. If things fall apart, we can't just leave. Not once you're married. It'll be a scandal and people will talk and... She stopped, her fingers tangled in thread. I don't want to lose this place, Mama, but I don't want you to be trapped either. Ilara set down her sewing and pulled Hannah close, her eldest daughter still carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Listen to me. Rhett and I have talked about all of this. We've made arrangements to protect all of us, including you kids. If something does go wrong, and I don't think it will, but if it does, you'll still have security. You'll still have options. She paused. But Hannah, at some point we have to take a leap of faith. We can't live our whole lives preparing for disaster. Why not? Disaster keeps finding us anyway. It was a fair point, and Ilara didn't have a good answer for it. How did you teach someone to hope again after life had proven itself cruel? How did you convince a child that taking risks was worth it when the last risk had cost her everything? Because the alternative is worse, she said finally. Living scared, never trusting anyone, never letting ourselves be happy because we're too busy protecting ourselves from pain. That's not really living at all. That's just surviving, and we deserve better than that. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Do you love him? Yes. Like you loved Papa? Differently than I loved Papa. But yes, I love him. Okay. Hannah nodded once, decisive. Then I'll try to be okay with it. It wasn't enthusiastic support, but it was something. And coming from Hannah, it was more than Alara had hoped for. The winter passed slowly, the ranch settling into a peaceful rhythm. Rhett taught Thomas to ride properly, spent hours with Lily teaching her to read, helped Hannah with her arithmetic. He didn't try to replace their father, was careful about that, always referring to your papa when memories came up. But he carved out his own space in their lives, became his own person to them. And with Alara, he was patient. When she got scared and pulled away, he gave her space. When she reached for him, he was there. He learned her moods, her triggers, the things that made her laugh, and the things that made her cry. She learned his too, the way he went quiet when he was overwhelmed, the tells that meant he was having a bad day, the small kindnesses he did without thinking. They fought sometimes, about money, about the children, about his tendency to make decisions without consulting her and her tendency to be stubborn about everything. But they always came back together, worked through it. Neither of them ran. Word of their engagement spread through town, and reactions were mixed but mostly positive. A few diehards still muttered about propriety and scandal, but most people seemed to have moved on. Brennan's crimes had shifted the narrative. Now Rhett and Alara were the victims who'd fought back rather than the scandalous couple flouting convention. Bill Patterson stopped by one afternoon with a gift, a hand-carved jewelry box for Alara. "Made it myself, Finn," he said, looking embarrassed. "Thought you could use it for whatever women keep in these things. It's beautiful. Thank you." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Look, I know I was one of the worst. When you first came to town, I turned you away from my store, spread rumors, made things harder than they needed to be." He met her eyes. "I want you to know I regret that. All of it." Alara studied him, this man who'd been so quick to judge and so slow to help. Part of her wanted to hold on to the anger, to make him feel the full weight of what he'd done. But she was tired of carrying grudges. Tired of letting other people's failures define her. "I appreciate the apology, and the gift." She paused. "But I won't forget how you treated us. Trust is earned, Mr. Patterson, not given freely because someone says they're sorry. That's fair." He nodded, accepting the boundaries she'd drawn. "I'll work to earn it then." After he left, Rhett came to stand beside her, looking out at where Patterson's wagon was disappearing down the road. "You handled that well." "Did I? I wasn't sure if I was being too harsh or not harsh enough." "You were honest. That's what matters." He put his arm around her shoulders. "You don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they finally figured out they were wrong. Your sister would say I'm being vindictive. My sister is a judgmental snob who doesn't get a vote." His tone was matter-of-fact. "Besides, there's a difference between holding a grudge and having boundaries. You're allowed to protect yourself." It was something Alara was still learning, that protecting herself didn't make her hard or cruel, that she could forgive without forgetting, could move forward without pretending the past hadn't happened. Spring came late that year, the snow lingering well into March. But when it finally broke, it broke spectacularly. The world turned green overnight, wildflowers carpeting the hills in riots of color. And Alara felt something in herself break open too, something that had been frozen for too long. They set the wedding for late April, a simple ceremony at the ranch with just the essential people present. No big celebration, no town-wide event, just the judge, a few close friends, and the children. The night before the wedding, Alara couldn't sleep. She paced her room, her mind spinning through everything that had led to this moment. A year ago, she'd been hiding behind a barn with 3 starving children, convinced her life was over. Now she was hours away from marrying one of the most powerful men in the territory, preparing to take on a role she'd never imagined for herself. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Hannah stood there in her nightgown, her expression uncertain. "Can't sleep either?" Alara asked. "Kept thinking about tomorrow, about everything changing." "Come here." Alara sat on the bed and Hannah joined her, curling against her side like she had when she was small. "Talk to me. What's really bothering you?" "What if I forget Papa?" The question came out small, scared. "Once you're married to Mr. Calder, once we all have his name, what if I can't remember Papa's face anymore? What if it's like he never existed?" Alara's heart broke a little. She pulled Hannah closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You won't forget. I promise you won't forget." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Papa will always be your father. Always. Nothing that happens tomorrow changes that. Mr. Calder, Rhett, he's not trying to replace Papa. He's just trying to be someone else important in your life. You're allowed to love both of them." "It feels disloyal." "I know, but it's not. Your Papa would want you to be happy, to have a good life. He'd want all of us to have that." Alara's voice caught. "He'd like Rhett, I think. They're different men, but they both care about family, about doing right by the people they love." Hannah was quiet for a long time. "Do you still love Papa?" "Yes, different than I did, but yes. He'll always be part of me, part of you and Thomas and Lily. That doesn't go away just because we're moving forward." "Okay." Hannah nodded against her shoulder. "Okay. I can do this then." They sat together in the quiet, mother and daughter, on the eve of a day that would change everything. And Alara thought about how much they'd survived, how far they'd come. From desperation to hope. From hiding to choosing. From broken to whole. Or at least whole enough. The wedding itself was simple and brief. Alara wore a dress that had been Margaret's. Rhett had offered it tentatively, worried it might be too strange. But Alara had accepted gratefully. It was beautiful, and it fit. And there was something right about carrying forward a piece of the woman who'd come before her. Judge Mercer performed the ceremony on the front porch, the same porch where so much of their story had unfolded. The children stood witness, Thomas holding the rings with tremendous seriousness, Lily barely containing her excitement. "Do you, Rhett Calder, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Mercer asked. "I do." No hesitation, no doubt, just certainty. "And do you, Alara Quinn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Alara looked at Rhett, at this man who'd found her at her lowest and offered her a way forward. At the children gathered around them, their children now, together. At the life they'd built from desperation and determination. "I do." The kiss was chaste, appropriate for the audience, but it carried the weight of everything they'd been through. When they pulled apart, Lily was cheering and Thomas was clapping and even Hannah was smiling, real and genuine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mercer announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Rhett Calder." Mrs. Calder. Alara tested the name in her mind, tried it on for size. It fit better than she'd expected. The celebration afterward was low-key. A meal, some dancing, the children running wild with the freedom of important occasions. Alara found herself watching Rhett with Thomas, showing the boys some complicated dance step that neither of them could quite master. The laughter, the ease, the obvious affection, it was real. All of this was real. "You did good, Mama." Hannah appeared at her elbow, her voice quiet. "This was the right choice." "You think so?" "Yeah, I do. He's not Papa, but he's good, and you deserve good." Coming from Hannah, it meant everything. As the sun set and their few guests departed, the family gathered on the front porch. The same porch where Rhett had stood and faced down Brennan, where Alara had confronted the town's judgment, where they'd had countless conversations that built the foundation of what they were now. "So what happens now?" Thomas asked, looking between them. "Everything's different now, right?" "Not so different," Rhett said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Same house, same family, just official now." "But you're our Papa now, for real." Thomas tested the word carefully. "Is that okay? Can I call you that?" Rhett's eyes met Alara's over Thomas's head, asking permission. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Yeah, Rhett said, his voice rough with emotion. You can call me that. Papa? Lily announced, trying it out. Papa, Papa, Papa. I like it. Don't wear it out, Hannah said, but she was smiling. And later that night, Alara heard her whisper it too, testing how it felt. Papa. Summer came, and with it a rhythm that felt like permanence. The ranch thrived under their joint management, Rhett handling the physical labor and business negotiations, Alara managing the household and finances with a sharp eye for detail. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. The children grew like weeds. Thomas shot up 3 inches and started losing his little boy face. Lily's reading improved until she could tackle books meant for children twice her age. And Hannah, still serious but less burdened, started making real friends in town, started acting like the child she still was instead of the adult she'd been forced to become. But the real test came in late August, when a rider arrived at the ranch with an emergency. A family had been found camped on the edge of town, a man, his wife, and 4 children, all in desperate straits. The father had been injured in an accident, couldn't work. The mother was sick. The children were starving. The rider looked at Rhett and Alara with eyes that said he knew what he was asking, that he remembered when Alara had been in the same position, that he was hoping they'd do now what Rhett had done then. Alara's first instinct was panic. They had just gotten stable, just figured out their own family. Taking in another group, especially one this large, would upset everything. Would mean more work, more complications, more risk. But then she looked at Rhett and saw the same conflict in his eyes, the same calculation of cost versus conscience. We have space, she said slowly. The West Wing is mostly empty, could fit another family if we arranged it right. Are you sure? Rhett asked. This is your home now too. You get a say in who we bring into it. She thought about hiding behind that barn, about the sound of footsteps coming closer, about 4 words that had changed her life. Get in the wagon. Now. I'm sure, but we do it different this time. How so? We tell them the truth from the start, that this is temporary, that the goal is to get them back on their feet and self-sufficient. We offer work, not charity, and we make sure the whole town knows what we're doing and why, so there's no room for rumors or assumptions. Rhett smiled, and it was proud. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just didn't notice. They brought the family in that afternoon. The Hendersons, no relation to Sarah, thankfully, were exhausted and wary. The parents kept apologizing, kept saying they didn't want to be a burden. The children clung to their mother, silent and wide-eyed. Alara understood that fear, that shame. She knelt down to the children's level, making herself small and non-threatening. I know this is scary. I know you don't know us and you're not sure if you can trust us. But here's what's going to happen. We're going to give you a place to sleep tonight, warm and safe. Tomorrow, we're going to feed you breakfast, and after that, we're going to figure out how to help your family get back on their feet. She paused. This isn't charity. We're going to work together. But nobody here is going to judge you or make you feel small, okay? The oldest Henderson girl, maybe 9 years old, studied Alara's face like she was trying to decide if this was real or a trap. Finally, she nodded. Okay. That night, after the Hendersons were settled and the house had finally quieted, Alara found Rhett on the back porch, their spot where they'd had so many conversations that built this life. We just took on a lot, he said, not looking at her. 6 more people, all of them needing help. It's going to be hard. I know. We might fail. Might not be able to do for them what we did for you and the kids. Maybe. But we have to try. She sat beside him, taking his hand. You saved my life, Rhett. Mine and my children's. If we can do the same for even one other family, isn't that worth it? He looked at her then, and there was something profound in his expression. When did this become about more than just us? I don't know. Somewhere along the way. She squeezed his hand. You know what I realized today, when that rider came asking for help? I wasn't scared about losing what we have. I was scared about not doing enough, about having the power to help and choosing not to. That's a dangerous way to think. You can't save everyone. No, but we can save some, and maybe they'll save someone else someday. Pass it forward. She leaned against his shoulder. We're not just building a family here, Rhett. We're building something bigger, a place where people can find shelter when they need it, where desperation doesn't have to be the end of the story. He was quiet for a long time, processing. Then he laughed softly. You realize you're describing exactly what Margaret always wanted? She used to say this ranch should be more than just a business, that we had enough to share, and sharing was what gave life meaning. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. You would have liked each other, I think. He paused. She'd be glad, that you're here, that the house is full again, that I'm... He stopped, struggling with the words. That you're living again instead of just surviving? Yeah, that. They sat together as the stars came out, watching the lights in the various buildings scattered across the ranch. The bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the small cottage where the Hendersons were settling in, the main house where their own children slept, safe and secure. I have an idea, Alara said suddenly, about how to make this work long-term, how to help more families without it all falling on us. I'm listening? What if we formalized it, created an actual program? Families in crisis come here, work on the ranch in exchange for room and board, stay until they can get back on their feet. We teach skills, help them save money, give them references for jobs elsewhere, make it official so people understand what we're doing. Rhett considered this. That would take resources, money for supplies, for expanding the living quarters, time and energy to manage it all. But we have those things. And if we do it right, if we involve the town and get other ranchers on board, it could become something real. A way to catch people before they fall completely through the cracks. You've really thought about this. I lived it, Rhett. I know what that desperation feels like. And I know that all I needed was someone to give me a chance. She turned to face him. We can be that chance for other people. We should be. He studied her face, seeing the determination there, the woman who'd been broken and put herself back together, who'd fought for her place in this world and won, who wasn't content with just surviving anymore but wanted to help others do more than survive too. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. Build something that matters. They sealed it with a kiss, there on the porch under the stars. And Alara thought about all the moments that had led to this one. Every choice, every risk, every leap of faith. She'd come so far from that desperate woman hiding behind a barn, had become someone she barely recognized, stronger, braver, more certain of her place in the world. But the core of who she was hadn't changed. She was still a mother first, still fierce in protection of her children, still carried scars from the past that would never fully fade, still had moments of doubt and fear. She wasn't perfect, wasn't healed completely. Probably never would be. But she was whole enough, and that was something. The months that followed proved that good intentions weren't always enough. The Henderson family was harder to help than Alara and Rhett had anticipated. The father's injury was worse than they thought, limiting the work he could do. The mother's sickness turned out to be chronic, requiring ongoing care. And the children, traumatized by months of uncertainty, acted out in ways that tested everyone's patience. There were moments when Alara questioned whether they'd made the right choice. Nights when she lay awake listening to one of the Henderson kids crying and wondered if they'd taken on too much. Days when the work felt endless and the progress invisible. But slowly, incrementally, things improved. The father began physical therapy and regained some function. The mother's condition stabilized with proper medication and rest. And the children, given structure and security, started to relax, started to trust. By the time winter came again, the Hendersons had saved enough money for a small place of their own in town. Mr. Henderson had a job lined up at the mill. The children were enrolled in school. They were ready to stand on their own. The day they left, Mrs. Henderson pulled Alara aside, tears streaming down her face. I can never repay what you've done for us. Never. You already have, Alara said, meaning it. You worked hard, pulled your family together, didn't give up. That's payment enough. If we're ever in a position to help someone else, then help them. That's all we ask. Pass it forward. After they left, Alara found Rhett in the barn, ostensibly checking on the horses, but really just needing a moment alone. She understood that need, gave him space for a minute before joining him. "We did good," she said quietly. "We did." He turned to her, and there were tears in his eyes he wasn't bothering to hide. Margaret would have loved this, seeing the ranch become what she always dreamed it could be. "She'd be proud of you. She'd be proud of us." He pulled Alara close. "This is your dream too now, your legacy." It was true. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being Rhett's ranch or Margaret's vision and become theirs. A shared purpose, a shared mission, building something that would outlast them both. Over the next year, they helped 2 more families, then 3 more. Word spread, and people started coming to them directly instead of waiting for crisis. They built additional housing, hired more staff, created actual structure for what they were doing. The Calder Ranch Assistance Program, they called it. Not creative, but clear and effective. By the end of the 2nd year, they'd helped 11 families get back on their feet. 11 families who might have ended up like Alara almost did, broken, desperate, lost. The town's attitude shifted completely. What had started as scandal became pride. Red Creek was the town that took care of its own, that didn't let people fall through the cracks. Other communities started asking for advice, wanting to replicate the program. And Alara found herself in a role she'd never imagined. A leader, a voice for people who had none, an advocate for the desperate and displaced. It was terrifying and exhausting and more fulfilling than anything she'd ever done. The children thrived in this environment. Hannah, now 14, started helping with the newer families, her own experience making her uniquely qualified to understand what they were going through. Thomas, at 9, had become Rhett's shadow, learning ranch management and dreaming of the day he'd run operations himself. And Lily, 7 now and fierce, appointed herself the official welcomer, showing new children around and making sure they knew they were safe. 3 years after that desperate night behind the barn, Alara stood on the front porch watching her family, her huge, complicated, beautiful family, prepare for a celebration. The ranch's anniversary, they were calling it, though really it was her anniversary. 3 years since Rhett had found her, since he'd said those 4 words that changed everything. "Penny for your thoughts," Rhett said, coming to stand beside her. "Just thinking about how far we've come, how different everything is. Better different or worse different?" "Better, definitely better." She leaned into him, too, though some days I miss when it was just the 5 of us, before it got so complicated. "We can scale back if you want. Focus on our own family for a while." She considered it, then shook her head. "No, this is right. This matters." She paused. "But maybe we take a vacation sometime. Just us and the kids. Remember what it's like to be a normal family." "We've never been a normal family." "True. But we could pretend for a week or 2. They stood together, watching the sun set over the ranch, over the buildings and the people and the life they'd built from desperation and determination and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. "You know what the best part is?" Alara said softly. "Not the program, or the recognition, or any of that. The best part is that we proved something." "What's that?" "That chosen family is real family. That love isn't just about blood or obligation. That you can take broken pieces and build something whole." She looked up at him. "That mercy isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing there is." Rhett pulled her close, and they stood there as the stars came out, holding each other in the quiet. And Alara thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The desperate widow, the fierce mother, the reluctant employee, the defiant partner, the wife, the advocate. All of them were true. All of them were her. She wasn't perfect. Still had days where the old fears came back, where she wondered if this was all too good to last. Still woke up sometimes from nightmares about being back behind that barn with nowhere to go. Still carried the weight of everything she'd lost and everything she'd survived. But she was here. She'd made it. Not just survived, but built something that would outlive her. A legacy of mercy and second chances, of refusing to let desperation be the end of anyone's story. "Thank you," she whispered into Rhett's chest. "For what?" "For looking behind that barn, for not walking away, for giving us a chance when nobody else would. Thank you for taking it, for being brave enough to get in that wagon. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, for staying even when it got hard, for making this house a home again. In the distance, she could hear the children laughing, the sound carrying on the evening air. Hannah's voice raised in mock outrage, Thomas's giggle, Lily's determined chatter. The sounds of family, of home, of a life built from nothing into everything. This was it, Elara realized. This was what survival looked like on the other side. Not just breathing and getting by, but thriving, building, growing. This was what it meant to take mercy given and turn it into mercy shared, to take a second chance and use it to create third and fourth and fifth chances for others. They'd started with desperation and determination. They'd built something that would echo forward through time, changing lives they'd never meet, helping families they'd never know. All because one man had looked at a desperate woman and her starving children and said 4 simple words: "Get in the wagon. Now." 4 words that became an invitation, that became a partnership, that became a family and a mission and a legacy. 4 words that prove that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up for someone when they need it most. That mercy, real mercy, doesn't ask for gratitude or repayment. It just gives because giving is right. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that mercy comes back around, becomes something bigger than itself, becomes a story worth telling, a life worth living, a future worth building. Elara Quinn. Calder stood on her porch in the gathering dark, surrounded by the family she'd found and the family she'd made, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Complete, not perfect, never perfect, but whole in all the ways that mattered. And that was more than enough.